A weathered old cemetery, a sprawling mansion, and a decaying bridge await on this list of some of the most haunted places in Mississippi. Let's check it out. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me on this journey through some of the Magnolia State's most iconic haunted places. Recognized as the birth state of Elvis Presley for its unparalleled cuisine and for some damned good football, Mississippi also boasts a much darker legacy, one wrought with spine-tingling ghostly fables, old hill stories, and classic southern folklore. Are you ready to dive right in? Okay, so our first haunt has us traveling to the center of Mississippi to the Chapel of the Cross. The Chapel of the Cross, which is located just out of Madison, Mississippi, is a historic Episcopal church noted for its Gothic Revival architecture, as well as for an impressive assortment of associated local legends and tales of ghostly encounters. Historically, this church as a foundation would first be established on the Annandale plantation for the Johnston family, who'd migrated from North Carolina to Mississippi to, in 1819, establish their forced labor farms. Though family head John T. Johnston had envisioned the construction of a full chapel, he would pass on in 1848, after which his widow Margaret would assume his plans. Construction of the chapel would begin in 1850, with Margaret utilizing the labor of those enslaved on her plantation. During the construction, she would deed the site to the Episcopal Diocese of Mississippi, and on September 19th of 1852, the church would be consecrated by Bishop William Mercer Green. In 1880, Margaret would pass on, after which Annandale would be abandoned for a time. On September 9th of 1924, the mansion would burn to the ground, and in 1903, the chapel would be declared a parish extinct. That is, until 1911, when Johnston granddaughter Margaret Britton Parsons would convince the diocese to restore the church's status, with the process fully completed by 1914. In 1956, the site would welcome a set of physical restorations. In 1979, it would be added to the National Register of Historic Places, resulting in the awarding of a $50,000 grant to finish said restorations. And to date, the Chapel of the Cross remains open, acting as a prominent place of worship to the community. This weathered church, which is literally built on the blood, sweat, and tears of the enslaved, has long been associated to a number of chilling legends and stories of supernatural occurrences, and those braving its bounds have reported the disembodied chanting of old-timey prayer rituals, instances of the front door opening and closing on its own, and both phantom footsteps and prints left in fresh mud. One more famous legend associated with this church tells of one Annie Devlin, a former governess who met her fate at the Annandale mansion. Incidentally, Annie's spirit was rumored to roam the estate until it burned to the ground, and ever since it's been sighted stalking the chapel, usually on moonlit nights. Also reported around the church and its grounds are extreme cold spots, encounters with the apparitions of both the enslaved and past parishioners, and instances in which those passing by swear they see lights or hear music coming from the structure at times when it's supposed to be completely empty. A final famous fable tells of Helen Johnston and her fiancé Henry Gray Vick. As history has it, Helen, who was the youngest daughter of John and Margaret, met Henry at her sister's home, Ingleside, in December of 1855. By 1857, they were set to be married on May 21st of 1859. However, just 4 days short of their wedding date, Vic was killed in a duel in Mobile, Alabama, after which his body was shipped back and buried in the churchyard. Helen would subsequently pass on in 1917 at the age of 78, and ever since her death, her weeping apparition clad entirely in black has been spied right near the grave of Henry, forever mourning the loss of her one true love. Our second haunt takes us about 2 hours to the northeast of Madison to the ever-famous Waverly Mansion. The Waverly Mansion, which is located just out of West Point, Mississippi, is a former plantation home turned historic house museum that overlooks the Tombigbee River that stands as a prime example of antebellum-era estates, and it's shrouded in a chilling range of ghost stories. Historically, Waverly was first constructed by Colonel George Hampton Young, who hailed from Georgia, and while the exact date of its completion is still sort of unknown, it's generally accepted that this formidable residence was finished sometime around 1852. Notably, the Colonel's wife, Mrs. Lucy Watkins Young, would pass on before the mansion was ever fully completed. However, her spirit would live on in the English boxwood tree she'd ordered planted along its entrance. These odd trees are known for growing all of a foot over over a 15-year span, and incidentally, Waverly's boxwoods are estimated at around 150 years in age. In its earlier days, the site acted as a self-sustaining community and boasted a cotton gin, a brick kiln, an ice house, and a bathhouse complete with a pool. Over time, mansion grounds would evolve to also host its own lumber mill, a leather tannery, and a hat manufacturing operation. It produced some of the first American-made saddle blankets. In 1880, Colonel Young would pass on, was buried on site, and would leave Waverly to his family. And in 1893, the first fox hunt association ever was formed right at the mansion's grand library. Following the subsequent death of the colonel's last remaining son, Captain William Young, Waverly would slip into decline. The once prestigious home would be left to stand the tests of time, the elements, and even the occasional plunderer, and would fall rapidly into disrepair over the following 50 years, until 1962, when the site was purchased by Mr. and Mrs. Robert Snow of Philadelphia, who would work tirelessly to restore the once prominent residence. Today, the mansion is owned and operated by Charlie and Dana Stevenson, who continue to honor its legacy. In the present, Waverly remains open to the public and stands as both a monument and memorial to its own unique era in Southern history. Over its many years, the whole of this aged abode has played host to a number of chilling ghost stories, and owners, workmen, and visitors alike have reported a range of supernatural phenomena, including extreme cold spots, encounters with shadowy manifestations, and accounts of objects moving around on their own, or furniture found completely rearranged inexplicably overnight. One more prominent haunting experienced on site was first documented by former owner Mrs. Snow, who reported the apparition of a young girl who would appear, disappear, and even follow her around for great lengths at times, and that always called out for her mother. While the identity of this spirit is unknown, many believe that she may be related to the Young family, though this has never actually been confirmed. In the parlor, some have reported phantom music and laughter heard emanating from the space when it's completely empty. A spectral soldier has been spied rushing past out of the peripheral, and in the gardens, an ethereal rider on horseback has been known to appear and even leave hoofprints in its wake. Lastly, the spirits of the Young family have all been sighted across the mansion and its grounds, sometimes alone and at others together, seemingly acting out scenes from their lives long since past, in a fashion that leaves many to assume they're unaware that they're actually dead. And on to our third haunt, which lies in Lauderdale County and has us traversing an iconic Civil War era crossing. Stucky Bridge, which is located in Lauderdale County just out of Meridian, Mississippi, and that spans 112 feet over the Chunky River, is an iconic crossing that's grown wildly in both fame and infamy, partly due to its fascinating history, and partly due to its association with some of the state's most intriguing ghost stories. Historically, the region now holding this ominous crossing was initially inhabited by tribes native to the region, including the Choctaw, for thousands of years, up until 1830 when, on December 27th, the government coerced tribe leaders into the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit, which ceded 11 million acres of land to the United States in exchange for 15 million acres out of Oklahoma. The first rendition of Stucky Bridge was contracted in 1847 and constructed in 1850 in order to provide a carriage and horse route in and out of a nearby community which in 1860 was incorporated as Meridian. In 1863, and amidst the Civil War, Union General Ulysses S. Grant would capture the nearby town of Vicksburg, after which the Union would push its assault eastward towards Meridian. And in 1864, Union General William T. Sherman would reach the locale with his forces, after which he would order the destruction of as much of the railroad and military infrastructure in town as possible. Following the war, Meridian would begin to rebuild, and beginning in 1870, a population of only 2,000 would more than double over the following decade as a result of advances in manufacturing and industry. It was during this era that local lore intertwines with history to tell that the famous Dalton gang would pass through town on their way out west, and in the process would leave one notable member, Stucky, behind. Though there's actually no historical evidence to suggest the following transpired, long-standing tales tell that after his abandonment by fellow gang members, Stucky would set up an inn right off the banks of the Chunky, after which he would spend his nights lurking on the bridge now bearing his name, with a lantern in hand and calling out to wary travelers floating goods down the river. Stucky would offer these travelers hot meals and a warm bed, only to enter their rooms in the middle of the night, murder them in their sleep, sleep, bury their bodies along the river, and keep all of their valuables for himself. And while Stucky was certainly clandestine in his operation, eventually the town caught on to all the missing persons, resulting in the local sheriff organizing a posse, confronting the outlaw, and hanging him from the crossing before dropping his body into the river unceremoniously to join all those he'd previously snuffed out. Not surprisingly, the whole of Stucky's Bridge and its surroundings are rumored to be haunted by the ghosts of former soldiers, of Stucky's countless victims, and of the nefarious bandit himself. And those who have braved the site, especially after dark, have reported disembodied bootsteps and voices, odd patches of fog that descend upon the bridge alone, even on clear nights, and encounters with a host of apparitions clad in attire from various eras. The ghost of Old Man Stucky, as he's more affectionately called, has been sighted on numerous occasions and is known to manifest in multiple forms. The first, as a threatening entity stalking lone walkers with that iconic lantern in hand. The second, is a phantom body spied swinging from the bridge for moments before disappearing. And the third, as ghostly cries and splashing that emanate from the chunky river below, without source. And as a word of caution for those maybe thinking of searching for old Stucky, some claim that his spirit can get quite aggressive at times and has even been known to attack those who cross his path. So if you plan on visiting this haunt, watch out. Lastly, many visiting the crossing have also documented extreme cold patches, orbs visible to the naked eye, and dozens of pale, spectral figures that appear walking amongst the nearby foliage. Several informal investigations have yielded extreme EMF fluctuations, chilling EVPs, and hits on communicative devices, and more perturbing accounts detail instances in which cell phones or other personal electronics die inexplicably, and of well-maintained cars outright refusing to start. Now, onto our fourth haunt, which takes us just to the northwest of Jackson to the fabled Glennwood Cemetery. The Glennwood Cemetery, which is based out of Yazoo City in Mississippi, is a quaint and quiet burying grounds recognized for its fascinating history as well as for its association to one of the most infamous pieces of folklore in the state. Historically, what is now Yazoo City, or at the time Hannon's Bluff, was first founded in 1824. Shortly afterwards, it would be renamed as Manchester, and in 1853, it would finally re-establish itself as Yazoo City after the Yazoo River, which was previously named in 1682 by French explorer Robert La Salle as Rivière de Yazoo. As with all budding communities, a space was allocated in order to lay the locale's dead to rest, and as far as we can tell through documented history, the Glennwood Cemetery was established sometime around 1856, after the land it sits on was given to the city by one Captain John Willis and his wife Annie. Through the Civil War, and following a Union victory in New Orleans and Memphis, the Confederate ironclad, the CSS Arkansas, was constructed out of Yazoo City's shipyard in order to challenge Union control of the Mississippi River. One of her notable accolades transpired when she helped an all but imminent fall at the Battle of Vicksburg. However, later, on May 21st of 1863, the Union would push up the Yazoo River and would destroy the CSS Arkansas's shipyard, while burning down the local sawmill and lumber yard in order to capture existing vessels and prevent the construction of further vessels. Following the July 1863 capture of Vicksburg, Union forces would occupy Yazoo City for a period, during which time the Union ironclad, the USS Baron de Kalb, would be lost to a mine. Later, through September and October of the same year, the community would be occupied by federal troops. On March 5th of 1864, the Battle of Yazoo City would transpire, with the Union holding their ground but withdrawing the following day, and on May 19th of the same year, federal forces would once again return. Following a lengthy reconstruction of Yazoo City, and just as things were getting back to normal, in 1878, the yellow fever epidemic would strike. In 1904, the city would all but be consumed by a massive fire, but more on that later. In 1915, the Orr Modern Motor Car Company was founded locally by G.A. Wilson and C.D. Orr, and would focus its efforts on producing Orr's Worm Drive, though it would only assemble one prototype before closing its doors. And finally, the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 would cause additional damages to the community, though effective flood prevention measures were put in place afterwards, and it's remained safe from such threats ever since. More recently, on April 24th and November 29th of 2020, and again on May 2nd of 2021, the locale was wrecked by multiple tornadoes, and though it's since been rebuilt, it seems Yazoo City just can't catch a break. According to legend, however, there's a reason for that. Located within the confines of the Glennwood Cemetery sits a marker surrounded by an iron fence that's known as the Witch's Grave. According to long-standing legends, through the late 1800s, an old woman believed to have been a witch lurked along the banks of the Yazoo River and was known for luring in fishermen, after which she'd torture and kill her unsuspecting victims in what some describe as ritualistic sacrifice. Eventually, the town got wise to her ways, and a local sheriff is rumored to have chased the witch deep into the swamp, only finally catching up to her on May 25th of 1884, when the old woman was discovered half drowned in quicksand. As the witch was sinking, however, she uttered these words as one final curse: "In 20 years, I will return and burn this town to the ground." Now, for those of you paying attention, our previously mentioned fire actually occurred on May 25th of 1904, which is literally exactly 20 years following the death of the Witch of Yazoo. This fateful fire leveled 200 residences and over 324 buildings in total, and though a number of theories regarding its origins have been posed, none have actually been proven. One account tells that the blaze began in the parlor of one Miss Wise, who was preparing for her wedding. As these stories tell it, as Miss Wise was lighting candles, a strange wind picked up inside her sealed residence, causing the flames to jump to surrounding furniture and walls, and according to those present, the fire acted as if it had a mind of its own, or as if it was driven by some sort of supernatural force. Whatever the case, on the day following the fire, a slew of concerned citizens made their way to the Glennwood Cemetery and placed large iron chains around the grave of the witch so that she might never sully the beautiful town site again. To this day, the whole of cemetery grounds are rumored to play host to the vengeful spirit of the Witch of Yazoo, and those who have braved them have told of extreme cold spots, of disembodied laughter and music, and of encounters with both shadowy figures and with burned, full-bodied apparitions that are believed to be linked to the fire. Additionally, some have reported terrifying run-ins with the entity of the witch herself, who usually appears gliding through the skies, cackling terrifyingly after any who cross her path. Additionally, a number of Civil War soldiers were laid to rest in this very same graveyard, and the ghosts of these fighters in full uniform have been spied lurking about after dark. Saving the best for last, our fifth and final haunt takes us to the prestigious city of Oxford and onto the campus of Ole Miss. The University of Mississippi, or more affectionately Ole Miss, which is located out of Oxford, Mississippi, is the state's oldest and most prestigious public university that totes the title of being its second largest by enrollment, and that's tied to a number of chilling campus legends and Old Hill folklore. Historically, on February 24th of 1844, the Mississippi legislature would first charter the university, with planners selecting a site just out of Oxford for its isolation. In 1845, residents of Lafayette County would donate land west of the city to be used as a campus, and in 1846, architect William Nichols would oversee the construction of the Lyceum, 2 dorms, and faculty residences. On November 6th of 1848, Ole Miss would open its doors to its first class of only 80 students. In 1854, the University of Mississippi School of Law was established, and in 1858, school president Frederick A.P. Barnard would amend a number of school policies and positions in an attempt to increase the college's stature. Following the election of U.S. President Lincoln in 1860, sadly, Mississippi would become the second state to secede, after which the student body actually organized a military group called the University Greys, and within a month of the start of the Civil War, all but 5 students remained, with the college actually closing its doors in 1861. Following its closure, Ole Miss would be converted into a Confederate hospital. During this period, Farley Hall would act as a morgue, because that's not creepy or anything, and through November of 1862, the whole of the site would be evacuated as General Ulysses S. Grant moved his forces toward the area. Incidentally, while the Union destroyed nearly all available medical equipment, a singular professor who'd actually remained on site managed to persuade him not to burn the whole campus to the ground, which is literally the only reason the school is still standing. The University of Mississippi would reopen its doors to enrollment in October of 1865, during which time it would literally eliminate tuition in order for veterans to afford an education, though notably, the student body was entirely Caucasian, and in 1870, the chancellor would actually declare that he would rather resign than allow African American students to attend classes. In 1882, Ole Miss would begin enrolling female students. In 1885, it would become the first southeastern U.S. college to hire a female faculty member when it accepted one Sarah McGehee Isom, and from 1900 to 1930, Mississippi legislature would push to relocate, close, or merge the site with Mississippi State University, though this motion ultimately failed. In 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education would officiate that the rejection selection of students based on race was unconstitutional. But even still, 8 years later, all attempts made by African American students to enroll at Ole Miss had failed, until 1961, when following the inauguration of President John F. Kennedy, one James Meredith, who was an African American Air Force veteran and Jackson State University alum, applied. After months of pushback, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered Meredith's enrollment, with the Department of Justice and Kennedy himself standing with the case on his behalf. And even then, Governor Ross R. Barnett and Lieutenant Governor Paul B. Johnston Jr. would actually physically block Meredith from entering the campus. Eventually, things got so bad that the U.S. Court of Appeals would hold Barnett and Johnson Jr. in contempt and would issue charges of over $10,000 for each day they refused the young man. Finally, on September 30th of 1962, Kennedy would dispatch 127 marshals, 316 border patrol agents, and 97 federal prison personnel to escort Meredith, resulting in riots in which bottles of acid and Molotov cocktails were thrown, and 2 men were killed by gunfire, after which 13,000 soldiers were dispatched to quell the chaos. On October 1st, Meredith was finally able to attend his first class, and by 1968, Ole Miss would boast an African-American student body of around 100. More recently, in 1972, the university would purchase the former home of William Faulkner, the Rowan Oak House. 2002 would mark the school's 40th anniversary of integration. A year later, the mascot Colonel Reb was retired. In 2015, the college would remove the Mississippi state flag complete with Confederate battle emblem, and in 2020, it would relocate its long-standing Confederate monument. Today, the sprawling and prestigious University of Mississippi remains open, toting a student populace of around 24,000, while offering a very wide range of degrees and certification options. Chillingly, and over its lengthy existence, Ole Miss has acted as a birthing grounds to a number of ghost stories and disturbing campus legends, and both faculty and students exploring the school have reported extreme cold patches felt in adverse weather, disembodied voices heard from empty spaces, and run-ins with shadowy manifestations that have been known to stalk lone walkers after dark. In the Lyceum, which acted as a primary ward when the university was used as a hospital through the Civil War, accounts tell of phantom knocking heard emanating from within the walls, of the smells of blood and of burning flesh without source, and of encounters with spectral Civil War soldiers. Objects have been sighted moving inexplicably, and often overnight, furniture is found completely rearranged in the morning. Reported across campus and confined to no area in particular are ghostly gunshots and shrieks, strange patches of fog that descend upon certain areas alone, and the unnerving feelings of being watched, of being followed, or even of being touched or pushed by someone or something unseen. William Faulkner's former residence, Roanoke, boasts its own assortment of legends. One of the famous writer's favorite ghost stories talks of the Shegogs, who owned the property prior to his purchase. As it's told, the daughter of Colonel Shegog, one Judith, fell deeply in love with a Union soldier, and her discovery that he didn't share the same feelings resulted in her jumping from the balcony to her death, after which her body was discovered the following morning and buried in a shallow grave beneath one of the site's magnolia trees. The apparition of Judith has been sighted roaming Roanoke as if in a trance, and from Faulkner onward, those who have braved the expanse have told of phantom crying sounds, of objects found in different locations than they were left, and of odd electronic malfunctions with phones and other personal devices. Across the whole of campus, disembodied bootsteps have been heard, the spirits of Civil War soldiers have been sighted, and a number of instances tell of well-maintained vehicles refusing to start entirely. Coming as no surprise, the aforementioned Farley Hall, which acted as a morgue through the war, is another focal point for otherworldly tales. Also known as the Dead House, the bodies treated within are believed to have been moved to the Civil War Cemetery, which boasts a total of 430 grave shafts, and those who frequent Farley have told of entities sighted in the peripheral, of loud scratching and knocking noises that emanate from the top floor, and of instances of students walking up the stairs or rounding corners to find the layout of the building has completely changed, or is warped into a darker version of itself. Additionally, those who reside on Sorority Row, which sits directly across the street from Farley, have described spying a man climbing its brick walls, and have even called campus police, who always arrive to find the property completely vacant. Incidentally, the Civil War Cemetery, which sits right behind the Tad Pad, is believed to harbor the ghosts of soldiers lost in the fight, and long-standing legends tell their spirits might return to Earth to haunt this weathered graveyard at certain times, especially on Halloween night. Lastly, by day, the J.D. Williams Library may seem a peaceful place to catch up on good reads, but this site houses possibly the most paranormal activity across the whole of Ole Miss. Mezzanine A hides a secret trapdoor-style hatch that leads to a dark room known as the Well of Souls, and throughout and near it, many have reported hearing loud bangs as if someone or something is trying to escape from within. Also reported at the library are instances of mysterious figures walking into the bathroom only to never emerge again. And on Mezzanine C, objects have been known to move on their own, disembodied whispers are commonly heard, and several have described feeling uncomfortable, as if someone unseen is always watching. With its fascinating history, ridiculous assortment of supernatural activity, and ties to classic ghost stories, Ole Miss invites all who grace its bounds into a realm where reality meets the unbelievable, where fiction leaps from its shelves and into our own world, and where the spirits of the past remain ever present. Thanks for joining me on this exploration into the intriguing history and chilling hauntings of Mississippi. If you enjoyed listening to my ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this video a like, and share me with anyone you feel could use a good scare. I'll catch you all next time.